Hello and welcome to this festive postgrad presentation. Hopefully this is working and you can all hear me okay. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I'm at a wedding today. So if you have any questions, please either email me or just shout them at the screen and pretend I said something really insightful back. So this presentation is on stigma, free food, and the spirit of Christmas. There's a bit of preamble to this. So, my original research question was which specialty received the most free food during lockdown? I put previous, not to jinx it, as we may be facing another one, unfortunately. But this was an informal audit of staff from the different crisis teams that I'd been working with, at the admissions ward and CDAT, who I'm currently working with. Um, and just simply the question, how much free food did you receive while working during the lockdown? So this would have been an extremely dull presentation if I'd stuck with that question, because the answer was little to none. The crisis teams did say they got some protein shakes donated right before they expired by a gym that was going to discard them. Um, but the main noteworthy finding was that when the crisis team in RGH kicked up a fuss that they weren't receiving any of the pizza deliveries coming into A&E, the deliveries were actually redirected to maternity at the opposite end of the hospital so that it wouldn't be spotted. So this led me to the new research question: is there a correlation between stigma and the amount of free food received? um, which led me to look into how can we actually objectively measure stigma and what are the quantitative measurements that we can look at. Um, I'll come back to this, but if we can measure it, then it can be generalizable to not just mental health, but other potentially stigmatized specialties such as gum clinic. So a bit of background reading. There's some research that shows mental illness related stigma has improved over recent decades, but this study was unable to confirm that that was because of any kind of government intervention. Um, and another one, which in a kind of quantitative way looked at over 1 million tweets referencing mental illness. It found schizophrenia was the most stigmatized one, and OCD was the most trivialized. So I'm interested in the structural or institutional stigma. So often, kind of discriminatory beliefs aren't even explicitly realized by the person that may be enacting them. So, what actions cause worse outcomes in, say, mental health patients? Um, because something maybe wasn't done or something was avoided, um, and how can we measure this? There isn't much research on this. I initially wanted to look at kind of the distance of mental health units from the main entrances of hospitals because they're often kind of tucked away in remote parts of the site. Um, but I couldn't find any papers that look specifically at that. Examples of institutional discrimination are historical differences in research funding, um, things like insurance coverage. Yeah, as I say, a lot of these facilities historically often very isolated, and there's probably less of a problem now, but historically, pay scale differentials for people working in mental health. So this was me just looking at kind of the distance of the units from hospital main entrances. PCH actually would have done well, but since they moved the crisis team to a remote little office block, they're in second place now. Oh, actually, last, sorry, not second. I did find a paper looking at arguments for locating general adult wards inside the acute hospital, as you would with any other specialty. Um, the idea being that that would kind of improve integration, get rid of any kind of air of mystery that the old kind of asylums were shrouded in. It would be easier for patients to potentially access physical health treatments, and would help with collaboration between specialties, presumably, if all the doctors are kind of working in the same place and socializing together. However, arguments against are that if you're in, say, somewhere like UHW, where it's got kind of a tower block type structure, there's limited access to outdoor spaces for patients. If you are at the top of a tower block and have patients with suicidal ideation, that's not good. Um, Increased public exposure is only really as good as the quality of contact. If, say, members of the public witness, a patient being restrained or yelling out in distress, that's only going to increase kind of concern and stigmatizing attitudes. One study I found looked at differences between attitudes towards psychiatric units and psychiatric hospitals, and found no difference really in general opinion. So it's possible that the importance of location has been overstated. Um, the main two measures that I wanted to talk about, well, the main one, my favorite, is the social distance scale. um, because, as I said before, this allows for measuring of stigma, which can then be compared against other potentially stigmatized fields. It's not unique to mental health, and I'll come on to an example in a moment. So here is an example of the social distance scale. You can stop the video here if you want to read the case vignette, but you could put a case like this with any condition. So here they've used the example of leprosy, and this is what I mean by a lot of these discriminatory attitudes um, not really being apparent until they're challenged in a very specific set of circumstances. So this patient or member of the public who has previously been treated for leprosy, someone may say that they have no kind of no beliefs that would discriminate against them. However, then you have to test that. So, how would you feel about renting a room in your house to this person or working on the same team as them? Or would you have them as a neighbor? Would you be happy for one of your children to marry them? Um, would you let them look after your kids? Things like that. This is the other scale I looked at, which is good, but I think less so than the social distance scale. So, a couple of limitations to the social distance scale. People are generally aware that having discriminatory attitudes isn't a desirable trait, so may kind of play that down and put untruthful answers there. It's also not always certain that attitudes will directly translate into behavior. So, for instance, someone may say, if Boris Johnson walked in right now, I would punch him. And then, should he actually do that, they probably wouldn't. So, this led me to design a pilot study looking at stigmatizing attitudes, and how far they translate into behavior. So, would medical staff take food that they've been told has been made by patients on the mental health unit? Um, Everyone likes free food, so I didn't see the need for a control group. I initially started with this, But then I thought, this cake, it's too messy. If I was busy, I would probably say no to that, regardless of who it had been made by. You don't want to get covered in cake whilst you're trying to work. So I gave that one to the crisis team. But then I thought cookies would be much better. So these are Sainsbury's Taste the Difference cookies. But I thought I could get away with claiming that they were homemade, or rather made by patients on the ward. Um, I'm not blessed with any acting skills, so rather than try and deceive people by, talking to them, I just put this sign on them. I was originally going to take these to A&E and leave them there and see how long they lasted. But unfortunately, due to the recent COVID uptick, I left them in the crisis office. So overnight, three different members of staff took a cookie, but four said no. It was overnight, but then also during morning handover. So we got a fairly decent sample size. Um, and then after the crisis team and associated staff members had all been offered the cookies, I took them up to the junior doctor's office. That was just the last two, but unfortunately they survived for over 24 hours. So it's not looking too good for our attitudes towards the mentally ill. So unfortunately, we have all failed the social experiment. Um, don't really know what this means for us, but some limitations to the experiment are that they were shop bought, um, didn't really look authentic enough for my liking. As I say, this was originally for A&E, but ended up being amongst mental health staff. People may have just been blinded by the excitement over the cookies and not actually read the sign. Um, and to be fair to the junior doctors, there was one left of each flavor, and nobody likes to be the person that takes the last cookie. So they may have just all been being polite rather than not wanting to eat it because it was made by a patient. And there's my references. Hopefully this generates a bit of discussion. Again, sorry I can't be with you to take any further questions, but I appreciate any thoughts if anyone wants to get in touch. Have a Merry Christmas all, and I will see you in the new year.